Hello and welcome to another edition of Turbo Delphi Demos. I'm Nick Hodges, the Delphi Product Manager, and today I'm going to show you how pathetically easy it is to access data with Delphi. We're going to build a very simple application that displays what in the Delphi circles is known as the classic BioLife demo. Hopefully most of you listening to this are new to Delphi, so you don't know about that, but it's a classic demo that's been done since the very early days of Delphi way back in 1995. And it just demonstrates how really easy it is to access and display data in Delphi. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start up a VCL Forms application. I press the New Project button and I'm selecting VCL Forms Applications, and it brings up a basic form in the Form Designer. I'm going to size it out a little bit. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to look for the simple component that allows you to access data, the T-table component. This uses the Borland database engine to access data. Now, the T-table accesses the Borland database engine through something which is called an alias. And an alias is a name given to a specific database location inside of your database. In this case, I'm going to pick what is called the DB demos database, and I am going to point it to the table called BioLife. And now, once I've done this, I have access to the data inside of the BioLife table inside the Borland Developer Engine, BDE, database engine. Now, that data is a collection of information about a bunch of fish, actually. And what it does, it's a paradox table. And the BDE allows you to access paradox. Now, if I take this component and I double click on it, it brings up what is called the Fields Editor. And the Fields Editor allows me to edit and deal with and manage all of the fields inside of the BioLife table. So if I right click on the Fields Editor and select Add All Fields, you'll notice it goes out and it grabs all the metadata information about the BioLife table inside the BDE and brings it back to me. And now you'll notice I've got species number, category, a bunch of different fields, and you'll notice that as I select them, they change in the Object Inspector as well. And you can see that this common name is a string field, the species name is a string field, the length in the inches is a float field, and so on. The notes is a memo field, and indeed there's a picture of each fish as a graphic field. So now once these fields are assigned, I can actually change them and deal with them in different ways as I want. But we won't worry about that too much right now, but just be aware that allows you access to the field level information about each individual record in the database. So now I've got my table up here in the right. First thing I'm going to drop down is a DB grid. I'm going to click on this little filter funnel here, and I'm going to type DBG DB grid. I started typing that, and you notice I get T DB grid. So I'm going to grab one of these. I'm going to drag it out, and I'm going to put it along the bottom here. Now I'd like this grid to snap to the bottom half or the bottom section of the form. So I'm going to set its align property to bottom. And now notice that as I do this, as I size it, it has snapped to the lower half of the screen of the form. So I'm going to display some basic data here in the grid. Now to get the grid to talk to the table, I need a component called a data source. So I searched for data source and I found the classic component, the stalwart component, the data source. And I'm going to hook the data source to the data set, the table. A table is a form of data set. It's a data set that holds data. The data source becomes a source of data for data-aware controls. The grid is a data-aware control that knows about data sources, and it indeed has a data source property. So I'm going to select the grid and select its data source property and hook it up to the data source. Now, if I go back and turn the table to be active, immediately you'll see that now we can see data in the grid. Now, you'll notice that the grid is a little wider here than the table, than the form itself. And it also has these two fields called notes and graphic. And of course, memo isn't very useful here, and the picture isn't too useful because all it does is show us the grid, doesn't actually automatically display a graphic by itself. So we're going to do a little work to display the notes, the memo notes about the fish involved here, as well as the graphics. But first we want to get rid of these two fields here. So the way we can do that is we can double click on the grid like I did here. That brings up the grid columns component editor, and we can right click and select again add all fields, right? And now we can deselect the graphics field and the notes field, and you'll notice now that the rest of the fields are now still displayed. And in fact, we can use the object inspector to, for instance, clean up some of these names. For instance, common underscore name doesn't look too good, so we can come in and we can use that to change the title of the caption on this particular field. Whoops, put a space in there. Yeah, we could do that for the other fields as well. And you notice now that though the field name is common name, by default the column headers take on the field names. We've now changed it to remove the underscores. Now we do want to display that data, however, so I'm going to look for a control called the DB memo control. Here's a DB memo control, and I'm going to grab this and put it here. I'm going to use the alignments grids to just kind of nicely align it up in the corner. And the DB memo is a control that knows how to display memo data from a field, and so from a data field. So it also has a data source property that hooks up to our data source again, that hooks back to our BioLife table, and it also has a data field property that I'm going to set to notes. And now you'll notice that the notes for that particular fish are here in the memo. And now, since the notes can be a bit long, I'm going to go ahead and attach and set a vertical scroll bar in there to allow us to scroll through the data, the memo itself. I'm going to do something very similar for the graphic inside the control. I'm going to look for the DB picture, DB picture, okay, so it's the DB image control, we'll call it that. I'm going to drop a DB image control over here, and I'm going to place it right here, like so. We can size these things up. Notice how those guidelines make it very, very easy to space things properly and exactly right like you want them. Notice too that these components up here are non-visual components, so I'm not worrying about where they're located specifically because they won't appear during the running of the application. And oh, by the way, I want to save this. I'll just save it with the default names. So now the DB image control again hooks to our data source, and then its data field property will hook up to the graphic field, and now you notice we have a nice little picture of a fish. And let's size it a little bit just so we can maybe get the more fish in here and less text, because the text will actually wrap nicely. Now that's really neat and everything, but one of the things that'll happen when we run this application is we're going to want to navigate through all of this data here. We're going to want to navigate through it. So I'm going to look for a specific component that has navigation capabilities, the DB navigator control. I'm going to drop one of those right here, and let's see, we can size the see how the little guidelines. And the navigation control knows how to talk to a data source as well, so we can set its data source property to our trusty data source above. And now we have a very, very simple but straightforward application that displays data. If I save and run, the application will run. I can navigate through the data here, moving from fish to fish. The navigator control knows how to move the cursor that points to the current record through all of the records in the database. Each control knows how to present the data for the current fish that's selected. You notice that the fish and the memo and indeed this indicator here all change as we move through the records. I can move to the front and the back of the record, And instantly, within, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 minutes, you'll notice that I have a pretty powerful, straightforward data display application. And it also is very informative for you, those of you interested in aquamarine life. So that's it. We've got a very simple database application. I want you to note that we wrote no code. We used nothing but power for the powerful components on the Delphi Turbo Delphi tool palette, and we were able to display and run through some base data very, very quickly and very easily. So that'll conclude another episode of Delphi Turbo Delphi Demos. Thanks.